I'm going to tell you about a doll that watches me sleep. My name is Peter, and I've lived in this house for over 30 years now. I grew up here with my parents, and I never wanted to leave. After I got married, I stayed in the family home while my wife, Susan, lived with her parents in their apartment building downtown, and every weekend we would meet somewhere in between and have our romantic time. But it was always an exhausting trip. So we decided that one of us should move, and that when Susan S.'s parents offered her a deal, she could unrefuse. They told her that if she moved into their apartment building, they would pay for her rent for at least 5 years. And so after only a few months of being married, Susan had to say goodbye to her new husband. But we promised each other that we would see each other every weekend without fail. And for the first few weeks, we stuck to our plan. We met halfway between our two homes, somewhere in between. But as the weeks went by, I started resenting this arrangement more and more. I didn't want to keep driving back and forth just to spend a night together and then drive back again. And I told Susan that if she really loved me, she would come to me. And finally she agreed. It was at that point that her parents paid for her to move into a new place close to mine. We were so happy that finally we could be together every day. And we quickly started looking for a new apartment together. We weren't picky. All we wanted was something cheap with enough space for both of us, and most importantly, somewhere where we could start a family. And so when we found this old house with a huge garden, we snapped it up immediately. Even though it needed a lot of work, we didn't care. We were just happy to have found somewhere that we could call home together. We spent all our weekends doing up the house, painting rooms, laying new floors, but most of our time we spent in the attic. Because we found a whole bunch of old dolls up there, and we thought it would be funny to bring them down and restore them. We made a whole collection of different kinds of dolls. Now, most of them were pretty creepy to look at, but we liked it. Our favorite doll was this one. She was dressed like a little girl in a nightgown and a bonnet, and she had the creepiest porcelain doll face we could find. And we decided to name her Emily. We restored all the other dolls, but we never finished restoring Emily. We couldn't find any fabric for a nightgown or a bonnet, so we left her wearing the dirty nightgown she came in with. I know it sounds stupid, but somehow it looked like she was hiding under the dirty nightgown. And for some reason that creeped us out a lot, so we never finished restoring her. But even though I hated the idea of sleeping alone, I was also excited to start a family with my wife. And not long after we moved into our new house, Susan became pregnant with our son, Matthew. It was the happiest time in my life. My wife was glowing. She looked beautiful, and our son, he was perfect. Not long after Matthew was born, Susan stopped working, and she took care of our son while I worked during the day. We were a perfect team. Susan took care of Matthew during the day, and I took care of him at night. I loved those nights. There was nothing better than rocking our baby boy to sleep, and then lying in bed with my wife and our son between us. But as Matthew grew older, it became harder and harder for Susan to get him to sleep. He would cry every single night, sometimes for hours. And I don't want to complain or anything, but taking care of a baby is hard work. And so after a few months, Susan begged me to let Matthew sleep in our bedroom with us. At first I didn't agree. I didn't want our son to get used to falling asleep with us there, but I could see how exhausted my wife was, so I gave in. It wasn't long before Matthew was sleeping through the night, and it was so nice to fall asleep next to my son. He slept right in between my wife and me. The only problem was that he was scared of the dark. Every night he wanted his nightlight turned on, and he wanted to have the door open. So every night I would go up to our attic and take down our creepy doll, Emily. I hated touching that thing, but I did it for my son. Every night I would walk into Matthew's room and turn his nightlight on, and I would put Emily on his shelf and I would tell him good night. And he would reply, "Good night, Mary." I'd ask him why he called our creepy doll Mary, and he would just laugh. One night I was getting ready for bed, and I heard Matthew scream from his room. I ran in there and saw that his nightlight was turned off and the cord was hanging out of the socket. I immediately went up to the attic to get Emily down and to plug the nightlight back in. And as I was walking to the attic, I could have sworn that I heard footsteps above me. I told myself it was probably just some branches from the tree outside. I didn't want to think that someone was in the attic. When I walked into Matthew's room, I noticed that the doll was lying on the floor and the nightlight was once again turned off. I plugged the nightlight back in, and as I turned around, I could have sworn I saw the doll blinking at me. I didn't think much of it. I just picked the doll up and returned it to its shelf. and then I tucked Matthew into bed and left the room. That night, I woke up from a nightmare, and I saw that Matthew's nightlight was turned off. I went over to the shelf where I kept Emily, and I realized that the doll was missing. Searched the whole room, but I couldn't find her anywhere. And then I remembered that our window was wide open. Maybe the doll fell out of the window. I went outside to check, but the garden was too dark to search, and so I went back inside and closed the window. The next morning I woke up and I saw that Matthew was crying. I asked him what happened, and he told me that he couldn't find his friend Mary. I asked him what friend Mary, and he pointed at the doll's shelf. At that moment, I knew that my son wasn't just talking about a doll. He had developed an imaginary friend. I wasn't sure if that was normal or not. But as the week went by, I became more and more worried about my son. Every night he would ask me to turn his nightlight on, and every night before I did that I would hear footsteps running around in the attic. Every night when I walked into Matthew's room, I could have sworn that the doll was blinking at me. All weren't. Then one night I had enough. I was getting ready for bed when I heard footsteps running around in the attic. This time I didn't bother to investigate. Instead, I walked into Matthew's room and I screamed, "Who's there?" I will never forget the look on my son's face that night. He was terrified. I calmed him down, and I told him that I would stay in his room with him until morning. And then I turned off the lights and waited for whatever was up there to come into the room. It didn't take long. Figures slowly descended from the attic stairs, and as the moonlight shone through the attic window, I could make out the shape of a woman. She walked closer and closer, and then suddenly she jumped onto my bed and landed on top of me. I started screaming for help, and the woman held me down. And then I felt her sharp nails dig into my skin. I tried to fight her off, but she was way stronger than me. And as she leaned in closer, I saw the most horrific sight. Her eyes were completely black. There wasn't a trace of my son or Susan anywhere. And so I want you to take a moment to subscribe. Please don't forget that. Thank you.